Thank you all for joining this webinar today with D3 and ZeroFox. We're going to talk about how to take action on external threats with SOAR and TIP. And we have some very exciting speakers who I'm sure all of you would be really excited to listen to. And I think we should just move right into it. A couple of quick housekeeping rules before we start the webinar. The webinar is going to be recorded and will be available on demand. So for those of you who have a hard stop sometime in between, don't worry, you'll get access to the recording. Or if you like the webinar and want to share it with others in your organization, you will be able to do that. We will share a recording of the webinar once it's over. The webinar itself is for about 30 minutes, and we will follow it up with a 10-minute question and answer session at the end. I would encourage all of you to ask questions and type them either into the chat or into the Q&A box. The best question from the audience will receive a $50 gift voucher from D3 Security. So, and if we have multiple questions that are really good, I'm sure we can give out more vouchers. So without much ado, allow me to introduce our first speaker. He's AJ Nash, the Vice President of Intelligence at ZeroFox. He's got a background of 25 years in intelligence, which includes terrorism, insurgency, handling war criminals, human trafficking, dealing with cyber threats. His role at ZeroFox involves building world-class intelligence platforms and consulting on them. His thought leadership extends to traditional and social media, public speaking. He's authored a lot of blogs and magazine articles, and he's a very exciting speaker to listen to. Whenever I have spoken to him, I've learned something new about intelligence and security, and I'm sure that all of you will really enjoy this session today. Our second speaker is from D3 Security, Stan Engelbrecht. He is the Director of Cybersecurity Practice, having spent 6 years with D3 Security now. He advises security teams and leadership at global organizations, MDR firms on SOAR best practices. He currently is the president of the Vancouver ICS2 chapter and the Vancouver Security Special Interest Group. Other than what I've already mentioned, I'll also add that Stan and I have shared a common passion for creating innovative solutions that work for both D3 and our partners. So without taking any more of your time, I will now hand it off to AJ Nash to take it away.
Thanks, Amardeep. Appreciate it. So Amardeep, just keep me honest here, by the way, in the chat. If I'm coming up on time, just ping me. I should be fine on time, but you never know, and I want to give Stan the time to do the important stuff after me. So let me jump into this really quickly. So I want to start by talking about intelligence. As Amardeep mentioned, I got about 25 years in intelligence. About 19 of that was in the U.S. intelligence community, and I've been in the private sector about 6 years. And a lot of times when we start talking about intelligence, I really want to drive to the fundamentals. There are far too many people right now that use the word intelligence in all sorts of different applications, and oftentimes incorrectly. So I want to make sure that we're talking the same language. So when I talk about intelligence, this is from Joint Publication 2-0. It's unclassified, readily available information. This is the government foundation for how intelligence is done. And what we're talking about here is really the difference between data, information, and intelligence. This is the confusion many people have. That you see the large body of data that then drives into information intelligence. So in the simplest of terms, if I give you a large list of IPs or URLs, that's data. That's raw material. It's useful. It's valuable, but it hasn't really been processed yet. If I process that material, I can get you to information, informed data. So that's the list of IPs and URLs, perhaps with a threat score associated with it. But to get to intelligence, we have to do a lot more work. There's a whole product process that goes into this to get you to a product. And that's when you get that same list of IPs or URLs and that same threat score, but you also can understand when the architecture was hostile, when it was safe, when it was hostile, what adversaries have been associated, what tactics, techniques, and procedures have been associated. And you really get a better understanding of the full picture, what might be able to be done next, or what we might expect to see next. And that's really what intelligence is when we're talking about intelligence. So far too many organizations talk intelligence, and when you dig into what they're talking about, they're really in the data space or maybe informed data. And to be clear, those are both very, very important. Without data and information, you cannot get to intelligence. But if you're dealing with large bodies of data and you're considering those intelligence, that's like taking a large pile of bricks and saying you have a house. They're very different things. Let's move on to the next slide, please. All right, so let's talk about a quick definition of intelligence. Again, following on that same point, a huge challenge here is there is no single definition for intelligence in the context we're using. In fact, the intelligence community has 5 or 6, depending on which agency you talk to, and the private sector doesn't have a unified definition. So there's a lot of different definitions floating around. Sadly, I guess I'm going to add to that mix, but the truth is this is really cobbled together from the government space. I don't recommend reading every word. The important piece to understand about this definition is that intelligence is the product of a process, and the purpose of intelligence, that output, is designed to give organizations the best material to execute on plans, policies, and decisions and courses of action. What we want to do is give leadership what they need to make informed decisions. Now, this doesn't mean that leadership is going to make the decision we want them to make. I can give you an endless supply of stories of situations where intelligence organizations have given information to leadership who then made a different decision. But the important thing is to make sure that leadership is making an informed decision. They have other things to consider. There's risk factors to consider and cost benefit analysis and many other pieces that Intel may not cover. But our job is to make sure that people have all they can get in front of them and they understand the context of it to make the informed decision. Next slide, please. All right, so I mentioned intelligence is the product of a process. This is the process. It's called the intelligence cycle. Again, not inventing anything. This has been available for a long time. This is publicly available information from the government. I think the only thing that's changed is my graphics a little bit prettier than what you might find online. But the key piece here when we talk about the intelligence cycle, the first step is planning a direction. And I will tell you, this is where most people, most organizations I've seen working, trying to build intelligence programs, this is where they fail. Most organizations jump right to collection. They don't have an intelligence program. And then the next decision is we're going to have an intelligence program. They go out and buy a bunch of stuff. We're going to get a whole bunch of accesses and a whole bunch of vendors. And listen, vendors are happy to line up and take your money. So if you're willing to spend money, they'll gladly take it from you and they'll provide you a lot of materials or tools and a lot of opportunities to succeed. But unfortunately, if you don't have a plan in place, chances are you won't get the value that you could. And then you'll be frustrated later. So I normally talk to people about starting with planning and direction. It's important to understand who our customers are, our stakeholders, and what are their needs? What are we trying to solve for? A lot of times consider the priority intelligence requirements. If we know who we're serving and what we're trying to accomplish, and also perhaps how our customers are going to consume the information that we're bringing forward, then we're in a better position to move on to collections. Now that we know what we need, we know what we're trying to solve for, now we can have reasoned discussions with vendors on who can solve the problems we actually have. And we can present use cases to vendors and we can really test them out and understand who does what well. And maybe somebody fits in one category better than another. There's no one vendor that's going to solve all of your problems or be the single solution for intelligence. If a vendor tells you they're the sole solution, there's a good chance you shouldn't do a lot of business with them. They're probably trying to solve their problem, which is revenue, instead of your problem, which is intelligence. Generally speaking, you need a pretty large collection capability. Just because there's a lot to cover, whether you're talking about open source, whether you're talking about technical intelligence, whether you're talking about deep and dark web, whether you're talking about custom intelligence work, there's a large swath to come across. Some vendors do it better than others. Obviously, I would advocate for ourselves in terms of hitting a lot of these different areas. But overall, you're going to need multiple vendors, I think, to get a really strong collection capability. So once you've figured this out, you've got your planning direction, you know who you're serving and what your needs are, you started building this collection plan, you're bringing in some vendors, and then you're going to do some processing. That's the next step in the process. Usually that's handled, or in the cycle, I should say, usually that's handled by tools and technology, whether it's machine learning, AI. Some folks have, a threat intelligence platform. There's a lot of technologies there to bring things together and process. Sometimes it's done manually if people don't have a ton of volume. But the point of processing is to be able to deduplicate your work, to be able to bin, as I like to say, pieces together to understand what fits together. And to make sense of some of the things. Then you get into analysis and production, which is truly sense making and intelligence. This is very human component, where we start applying analytic tradecraft and standards to make sense of the information we have, of the data we have, start drawing conclusions, and being able to apply our analytic standards to our analysis and to come up with an output. And then there's dissemination. Intelligence is of no use to anybody if they don't actually receive it. So we have to have a process in order to disseminate intelligence to customers. And then after that, of course, you've got to be able to have some sort of feedback loop. That's the arrow there. And I will tell you, that's where most organizations really struggle, including the government space. is being able to understand what people think of the intelligence that we brought forward, right? So being able to determine what kind of feedback we have helps us go into the next stage. If we're not hitting the mark with our customers, maybe we have to reassess our intelligence requirements. Are the requirements wrong, or are we not meeting the requirements? If we're hitting all the customer needs, then we can talk about how we can just do process improvement, things of that nature. Next slide, please. All right, so this is my equation. Please don't steal it. Feel free to quote it. I call this a simple math of intelligence. I've had this for a while now, and so far I haven't had anybody snipe it, and I talk enough publicly. I feel like it's pretty safe. To me, intelligence is talent times access times time. I will confess, as I'm not a mathematician, this used to say talent plus access plus time, and somebody smarter than myself pointed out that a zero in any of these is a zero at the end, so there should be multiplication. So the key piece here, talent, access, time. You have to have the right people, and you have to have enough of those people. Talent is incredibly hard to get in this industry, especially people who have intelligence talent specifically. But you can have amazing access. You can buy all the best vendors. You can do all the best collection. But if you don't have people who understand what to do with that data, that information, how to create that intelligence, you're really going to struggle. The flip side of it is you can hire the best intel people in the world. You can steal everybody who's worth anything out of all the agencies and build a world-class team, but you need access or they have nothing to analyze. So you have to make sure you have strong collections and the ability for customers to, or for your intel team to have something to analyze and to go through, right? So the talent and the access time is one we don't control, but we have to understand, and we have to set our parameters accordingly and make sure our expectation management's in place. It's important. I talk to leadership a lot of times about the value of measuring time and where that really fits in. If your only metric is speed, you're going to have problems. People will produce really bad intelligence just to meet that metric. So when we talk about intelligence, generally speaking, the value of intelligence is timely, accurate, and relevant. And all of those are important. I would say timely is important, but speed in and of itself isn't necessarily. So it's important to understand that. But we do have to have expectation management. And if there's something needed in a hurry, we have to understand that your quality of the work will not be quite as good. You don't have the time to do the depth, so there's probably more caveat language. We have to take things for what they are based on the time that was available. A lot of times you get stacked reporting as a result. So I might give you something initially, here's our first thoughts, here's where we're at, we're going to continue to work on it, and then going forward, they may bring on more intelligence as they get more knowledge. They bring in more information, they're able to come up with better assessments. So it's important to understand all three of these components, but in terms of building intel programs, talent and access are the ones we control the most. Getting a really strong team, a diverse team. Diversity is incredibly important when building intel teams. Otherwise, you'll have groupthink. And making sure you have enough access to answer the questions that are being asked, which goes back to intel requirements that we talked about in planning and direction. Next slide, please. All right, so when we go into how to do the work itself, right? I talked about the analysis and and tradecraft pieces that go with intelligence. So I'm going to talk a little bit about processes and standards and ones I advocate for and the ones we use at ZeroFox. Again, planning direction starts with intel requirements. We have to make sure we have strong intel requirements. It's very hard to satisfy customer needs if you're not sure what their needs are, and whether that's a vendor like us working with customers or whether you have an intel program in-house and you're trying to support your in-house customers. It's very important to know what they're looking for. That requires conversation. This is a business of communication. It's important to understand what people are looking for and what they need. For standards, I personally prefer the Intelligence Community Directives, ICDs. You can Google that if you're not familiar with the term. There's hundreds of ICDs. Most are not very exciting reading, but ICD 203, 206, and 208 would be three that I would recommend. Or frankly, this Analytic Standards and Tradecraft guide that you see on the screen here, we're going to be publishing this soon, and you're welcome to just take it and use it. It is an adaptation of Intelligence Community Directives and how we're applying them at ZeroFox. We're going to make that publicly available for folks. The importance of Intelligence Community Directives can't be overstated, or at least some standards and tradecraft. Intelligence is also about language. We all have to speak the same language. High competence assessment versus a low competence assessment is an incredibly important distinction, and you need to understand how people made those conclusions and what those terms mean. There's a lot of terminology in intelligence that doesn't read the same as the news or journalism, and if people aren't aware of those terms, they may misunderstand what's being told to them. And then a style guide is really important when you're building a program to make sure that you have standardized intelligence products. Ideally, everything looks and feels the same. Customers have some predictability with that. You're in a position to certainly have a professionalized organization. We obviously have a style guide ourselves, and a product catalog goes along with this usually, so people understand what you're delivering. In the past, I've built intel programs, including one at a bank that comes to mind, where leadership would say, tell me everything you know about whatever topic was at hand. And tell me everything you know about is a boil the ocean kind of a question. It's going to put you in a real challenging position to succeed because you're not sure what that person really needs. or how much time you have to deliver it. And usually it's tell me everything you know about X, and you got about 3 hours to do it. So it's unrealistic. But by developing a product catalog, you're able to have a better conversation with the customer. These are the products we deliver. This is the time frame that goes with it. These are the caveats that go along with that product. This is what you can expect to receive. I knew I'd succeeded at the bank when senior leadership started saying, can I get a flash on this? Can I get a highlight on that? That happened to be our product catalog terminology at the time. Instead of saying, tell me everything you know. As soon as they said a flash, we all understood what they meant. It was going to be 1 to 2 pages. We had 4 hours to get it done. They knew it was going to be highly caveated. You wouldn't run off and change the world based on our conclusions. We haven't had a lot of time yet. And they would excuse a typo here and there, for instance, versus if they asked for a large paper that was going to take 3 weeks or a month, or 2 months, or whatever it might be, then there's expectations. It's going to be much more professionalized. It's obviously going to be much larger and a lot more in depth, and our confidence language should be really strong. That comes with standardized templates. If you're building a sort of product catalog, again, style guide, you want to have templates, you want everything to look professionalized, and make sure that you've got everything you need, right? And then the last thing is processes. Intelligence is also very much about process. You want to have repeatable processes that you can document. That's how you get consistency in the work, along with hiring quality professional people and having all the same training, is having processes, having a process for collection and processing, so that you can talk about, what's our collection plan? What do we need to bring in? How are we going to manage that data and information as it's coming in? What kind of processing we do? Automated if possible, because there's a lot coming in. Generally, you need an RFI process. Every Intel program I've ever been a part of, somebody asks a question, you need to be able to answer it. There's a whole process that goes with that. There's usually a publication production type of a process, which includes the editing cycle that goes with that. And ideally, some sort of a rapid response piece that may come out of it. You may, in the process of your regular work doing intelligence, we certainly run into this a lot, a news story hits or something really large hits, and you have to be able to pivot and act quickly. Whereas we may have our day-to-day cycle, we may have a production calendar running, something like Russia-Ukraine kicks off, and you've got to be able to pivot and say, okay, what's our process for this? What are we going to put out? How fast can we put something out that's valuable to the community? And then what messaging do we put with that, and what follow-on products will we do? In our case, we did rapid response for Russia-Ukraine. We had a product out, actually 2 products out that day, and we've had products out since, and we continue to run a cycle right now because it's still a very big part of the news. We've done the same thing for Log4j. We just recently did it last week for another topic, and we continue to improve that process ourselves. And then storage and feedback. You need to have processes to keep track of the intelligence you're publishing. You have to have a place to keep things, some sort of repository, and then that feedback piece, which generally you're going to look at passive and active feedback. Ideally, you can build some sort of a feedback loop into products that are being delivered to people where they have an opportunity to provide some instant feedback. But usually you're going to have a consultative arrangement where you can come back and talk to customers about how did you like what this Intel product said? Was it timely? Was it accurate? Was it relevant? What did it do for you? And what can we do better, right? And that's a really hard, but a very important component when you're talking about Intel programs and being successful with intelligence, is getting feedback from customers. Ultimately, that's our job. If customers aren't satisfied with what we're delivering, whether it's an internal customer or an external customer, then we're not doing our job. It doesn't matter how much we like our intelligence. The first thing to find out is, did they read it? That's another thing you run into sometimes with feedback, is customers say, oh, I didn't have time to read that. Oh, it was too big. I said I was going to read it and I didn't get around to it. If people don't read the intelligence, then we're all wasting our time. So really important to run through that process, and then that feeds the cycle forward. Slide, please. All right, so let's talk about this, how it all works in action, right? And again, I'm not here to sell anything. We're talking about intelligence writ large. This barely talks at all about our technology. There's just little pieces on the right end, just because that's who we are as a company. But the key pieces here, again, we talked about access, right? So sources. There's going to be a wide variety of sources from different locations. You're going to have a pretty good spread. In this case, some examples of sources we certainly use: dark web forums and covert communications, threat actor engagements, and botnets. You notice those are red, and then we start working into kind of a red and a gray space. The reason I've set that up that way, the red space, very much adversary areas. You're looking at having either strong technology or strong personnel that are able to go places they're really not meant to go, to pull information that they're not, people don't want you to have in a lot of cases. The data breaches tend to blend. There's some deep and dark web work on data breaches, but a lot of times you'll see that show up obviously in the public forums, and then lots of open source. We've really transitioned. Intelligence has transitioned very much into the open world. We talked about this in the government space when I was still in that space, 6 years ago or so, 6-7 years ago. There were folks there, strong leaders that I admire, who said, they really think intelligence is going to be very much a private sector business in the future. And to be truthful, I didn't see it. But others have, and we're starting to see that now. So there's a lot of value in open source, as long as you get it in large volume and you're able to process it. So in our case, we bring it into our data lake. which includes all of those data feeds plus finished intelligence products we're doing in-house. And the output of that, of course, will get you indicators and messages, alerts, but you have to have some mechanism for delivering. In our case, of course, it's our platform, and many different ways to pull intelligence out of our platform. There's the API for folks who want to plug it directly into other systems they have. We do have a search function in the platform so that folks can look for specific pieces of intelligence or topics and find responses to that. Customers are alerted on topics that interest them. There's also the on-demand service, the opportunity to actually ask deeper questions on things in the platform or questions unrelated to things in the platform, and have folks from my team dig in and answer those questions, or even dedicated analysts sometimes for organizations that maybe don't have the ability to hire all the people they want to. Either they're having a hard time hiring people with the skills they're looking for, or they don't have the budget to bring on full-time people. They're trying to size up their organization, but they have the demand. Oftentimes they'll say, well, let's just talk to a vendor like a ZeroFox and say, can you dedicate somebody to us? We'll have somebody on our side that actually runs the platform for them and does the intel work and is an extension of their team, or several people depending on how they're set up. So many different ways to get the delivery component sorted out. But this is just a quick run through of how intel goes from the deep dark web chatty conversations that nobody can really see, or most people can't see, all the way to the delivery mechanism of here's an intelligence report and something you can do about some recommendations for what you can do about this discussion. Next slide, please. All right, so let's get into some specifics. So this is, I'm going to talk briefly about a specific intelligence product that our team delivered. This was delivered a couple months ago now. We had discovered Kraken, so as you can see the headline, Meet Kraken, a new Golang botnet in development. So this was a discovery of our intelligence team about an unknown botnet that was targeting Windows, and a few of the interesting abilities. Now the paper, for what it's worth, I only got screenshot a few pages here. It's actually a relatively long paper on this topic by one of our researchers, but some interesting pieces that were discovered at the time, that this new botnet was able to download and execute secondary payloads, which meant you could really expand your capabilities as an adversary. Once you compromised somebody, it ran shell commands and took screenshots of victim systems. Used smoke loader, which allowed other malware to be installed and just continue spreading. So this was a rather significant problem. When we delivered this intelligence report, it certainly had a lot of value to our customers and to the community. Many folks were giving us solid feedback that this was really useful and helpful and actionable. It's another thing we often talk about with intelligence is actionable intelligence. Most people are very focused on what can I do with the thing you told me? And I will tell you, there's two things to think about with this. First of all, actionable intelligence clearly is the thing that people are focused on right now for good reason. We all want to be able to do something with what we get and take action. That's very important. Sometimes you will see informational intelligence, and I want people to understand the value of that as well. Everything isn't always going to be actionable. If that's the case, we're always living in a tactical to operational world. If you want to live in a strategic world, oftentimes we have to understand adversaries and trends that may not affect us today. I used to talk about in the government space, there's tens of thousands of intel analysts, and I promise you they're not all focused on the four major nation state adversaries we all talk about. Somebody's in a room someplace right now studying Bolivia, probably. I don't think Bolivia is a threat, to my knowledge at least. But if Bolivia became a threat tomorrow's too late to start learning about Bolivia. And it's sort of the same thing here. We have a lot of adversaries out there. There's a lot of things going on. It's important to be able to communicate about strategic intelligence and to understand the bigger picture, even if we can't act on it today. Many of those things do become actionable. But in this case, we had a product that also had serious actions that could be taken. Just a quick note before I go to that, the Kraken that we talked about in this case, this new botnet, not to be confused with the Kraken botnet for 2008, different botnets, just happen to have the same name. But in terms of this product, at the end of the product, after we've done all the analysis and all the research, we provided IOCs to all of our readers. So there was a list of IP addresses associated with this botnet and a list of hashes associated with this botnet. Most intelligence products have IOC lists attached, whether it's IPs, hashes, emails, URLs, whatever it might be. And this is a key component because generally speaking, the biggest challenge I've found in the 6 years or so I've been in the private sector doing intelligence work is we often get to the end of an engagement with a customer, or you might get to the end of a contract and you've heard nothing but good reviews. The customer loves your intel. And then at the end they go, well, the intel was great, but we didn't really get a lot of value out of it. This is really good reading, but we don't know what to do with the thing you've given us. Which is incredibly frustrating for us, obviously, as folks who are trying really hard to help people be safer, but also for the customer. I don't want, none of us wants customers to spend a lot of time, energy, and money on intelligence that they don't find value in. So that leads us to Stan's part here that we're going to talk about with D3 security, which is when you get an intelligence product like this, it hits your screen, you read it, you find it very interesting. But the question is, what do I do with it? How do I take action? How do I make this valuable for my organization and document that? And we all want that because it'll make you safer. And frankly, as a vendor, I want you to keep buying intelligence. So of course, the more value you get out of it that you can document, it's good for everybody. So Stan, you've read this Intel product. So if you get a product like this, you go through all the really cool stuff, you understand all the details and the screenshots, all the really cool things. But then, if I'm a customer and I've got our Intel at ZeroFox and I've got D3, I've got your talent and your technologies, what do I do with this now?
Yeah, it's a great question. This is part of the space where, and my background again is in the SOAR market space. So for those of you that are maybe unfamiliar with the term, because as everyone knows, we need more acronyms in the cybersecurity space because there's just not enough of them. So security orchestration, automated response. So our platform is really designed around the ability to help the SOC, which is really what SOAR started, is really a reactionary type product. But as it's continued to grow and mature, it's really now starting to change the shape of a lot of other teams, especially CTI and threat intelligence teams that are, AJ, exactly as you said, they're sifting through these reports, they're looking at how they can go and action them. And oftentimes on the action side of it, it's, okay, we've got this report, we've digested it, and now it's taking us time to actually go and look at what we're going to do with it and how we can apply it into the environment. And this is really where, when we start talking about the SOAR market space and where it's moving from a response side of it, but it's more of a proactive response in this particular case. So as you pointed out, looking on the screen here, there's IOCs that, the report provides. I would also like to mention there's also shell commands, there's PowerShell commands that were provided in the report, and a lot of different things within this report that when you look at them, there's a lot of space that we can take these items and then start looking at our environment. That's really where the SOAR platform comes on. So what I'm going to be walking through here is really a playbook that's designed within D3, and I'm gonna walk through part of it here as Amardeep changed the slide. So the point of start on this is really at ZeroFox's API or bringing the intelligence into the D3 platform. And again, as AJ said, there's an API capability. There's also the ability to just have a report on that side of it, and maybe it's just a manual upload. Okay, so there's different ways we can get the report into the system. But the big thing to realize is that within the platform, it really starts with what we consider the event pipeline. So this report's going to come in. It's going to then get parsed. So which is why I've just got a simple parsing stage set up. And what the platform is going to do is it's going to go and analyze all of the data in that report. And it's going to pull out sections like your IOCs. It's going to pull out areas where they've isolated the PowerShell commands. And at that point, once we've got that area parsed out, we can then go into a checking phase. In other words, we can tell the playbook to say, hey, look, what's the list of IP addresses? Is there a list of URLs? Is there a list of known bad hashes? Are there associated PowerShell scripts? Is there processes? Because within that report, you guys also list off a lot of processes that end up running after the malware runs, the dropper files put items on there. So this is the first initial part of the playbook after ingestion of the report that the system itself is going to check. So understand this can happen without any analyst having to look at it. They're not doing anything. Our system is grabbing this report, parsing it, and then checking for these items. So go ahead and switch the slide there, Amardeep. Perfect. Okay. So the ability to run through that conditional task in the beginning, so checking IOC types. Okay. As that check goes through, we can then do some really simple things. So, for example, updating the block list for IPs within your firewalls. That's a really straightforward item. It's a hook into whatever system you're utilizing, and allows you then to immediately take those IOCs and go, okay, you know what? We know the IPs. If there's URLs, we're going to add them into the block list. It's done proactively, right? So it's depending on the team makeup, sometimes the SOC may not have, or the intelligence team might not have access to that. Maybe they produce a ticket off to the network team that has to take care of it. But the idea is that you're taking the barriers away and speeding up the process of producing this, right? Because if we're trusting our intelligence, and as AJ mentioned, like the process of producing really, really good intelligence, we have to trust that, right? So if we're subscribing to our intelligence and we're trusting our TI teams, then we should be able to go and get rid of some of the barriers there in making these items actionable. So something that comes through, we trust the report. Yeah, let's go ahead and automatically block these known bad external IPs. Because why put any more friction in place, right? We want to get these things done quickly. There's a couple of the areas there that we now start running through. So I've got one listed there. It says call file hash playbook, and I'm going to run through this one a little bit more in depth in a bit. But essentially, it's a larger nested playbook. We can then use our SIM system to go and check for areas where is there anything in the logs for that PowerShell that's been run, right? This is an important check, right? Do we have instances where we can find this? Now, of course, there's reams of areas out there for what you have to do to set up being logging for PowerShell checks within your SIM and whatnot. But I would hope that at this point, it's such a critical piece that you should be monitoring for any type of PowerShell use within your environment. This gives you the capability then to ingest the report, grab that PowerShell line, pump it into a query for your SIM, and then get that back and find out what environments, what logs contain it, who's been running it, and we'll talk about that list of hosts and users there in a second. And then the last one, which is call affected hosts, that's really checking your EDR for is this process, are these known bad processes running on your endpoints, and that'll lead into other things as we move through. So understanding this point, all of this now is automated. Okay, so I haven't needed an analyst to push anything in here. We've taken the report, we've actioned on some of it already, and there's going to be parts coming up here that we need approval process before we get into that. So, Amardeep, go ahead and switch the slide there, please. So, as we move through the stages in the processing here, I'll start with the bottom part with listing the hosts and users. So, this is after we've discovered which particular hosts or users have run that particular PowerShell, and of course, it might not be the actual user that's run if they've been compromised. The adversary is going to have run it, or maybe as AJ pointed out, maybe the malware itself is given the capability to actually go and run additional files, and those processes have now appeared. You can now go through an approval process to say, hey, analyst, you know what? We found these particular hosts that have this process running. What do you want to do? And within the course of the playbook, maybe it's is there the option to go and isolate those particular hosts, because we now know that they have a process on there that's malicious, and we need to take these items offline. Maybe we need to also disable that user out of Active Directory because they've been compromised, right? If their machine's compromised, maybe something's up with the user. This gives that team the additional capability to go, let's just take this user offline, and check additional, maybe their credentials have now been compromised. Maybe we need to do some resets. There's a bunch of items that go along with that. The upper two there for call file hash playbook and call affected host playbook. I'm only going to go into one of them in great detail, but you'll notice as we feed into the rest of the process, it's going to come eventually to an incident review and a post-incident review. So this allows you to break out a standardized set of questions and processes for the team to look at and go, okay, when we get to the end of the stage of we've brought the intelligence report in, we've actioned on it, and then we can have a stage at the end to go within the report, and we'll get into the case management side of it here in a second, but to go, what was the end result, right? Did we find affected hosts, or was there nothing to find? Right? Maybe we had proactively blocked a number of these things prior to the report coming out. But it's really important to give people the space to be able to structure how they want to do their post-incident analysis and be able to communicate and talk about what was done, how it was done, and how they can improve their process for later on. And that's really what that end part is for. And we'll talk about that here as we go through it. But I want to move into the file hash playbook because I think this shows the strength of the system. It gives us the ability to do something a little bit more complex than just simply update and block a hash list. So go ahead and move forward in the slide there, Amardeep. Thank you. So part of the system is be able to go and call a block that then may lead to additional nested areas here to run maybe more complex things and get more people involved. So this one here, we're looking at that specific hash list that was part of the report, and we're going to do two things with it. First off, we're going to query the EDR. So most EDR systems allow you to query the endpoints to see if there's any file hashes available in there. It's usually a pretty standard API command within their set. And we can go, okay, let's take a look. Let's search for the hash if any of these hash values are available. Now, obviously, depending on the number of endpoints and how broad you're going to be searching, this could take a little bit of time. But at least at this point, it's in an automated fashion, and you're not having to break out into another tool set to do these types of things. You can get the system to do it for you. We can pull the results back and take a look and go, okay, A, was there anything found? If no, okay, fine. You know what? We don't need to worry about it. Those hashes aren't present on any of the endpoints. If they are present, what do we want to do at that point? Again, going through an approval process to let the analysts know, hey, we found something. What do you want to do? Do you want to quarantine the affected endpoints? If so, yeah. And then, you know what? Let's return a list of those back into the main case area, which we'll show in the end, that allows you to see everything that's been affected in a single area. The lower area here, we're now going to, again, we can query your SIM system to go, have we seen any of these hashes in any logs that have come up, maybe in the last 30 days, depending on your data retention within your SIM system. And again, if we have, is there network tools that we now need to reach out to add these items into block list or other areas? So this type of a nested system allows you to set up really a generalized playbook for how you want to handle your threat intelligence that you have coming in. I'm showing sort of one small swath, but you could check for a multitude of different areas depending on what you're getting back from your threat intelligence report, right? And it's just a matter of it, how do you want to handle it? What are the additional playbooks that you want to add into it? What's really your process in terms of actioning on your threat intelligence? And the idea is to look at your process for how you want to action on it, and then be able to automate what makes sense to automate. But if you do need a check and balance in place, put it in there so that you're not just relying on a system to indiscriminately add things into a block list. Amardeep, go ahead and head off to the last slide. So this is a simple screen grab. This is really what the case management portion of the D3 platform looks like. It's a centralized area that allows you to take all of the threat intelligence report data, house it in a single area. It will provide you the capability for having an audit trail for everything that we showed you that playbook ran. It'll be in there along with all the results. And it provides you the capability to communicate with team members within this area, and they can provide additional findings. They can put their notes in there, and then in the end, it allows you to produce a report that can be simply exported off to management to go, hey, we had this fantastic threat intelligence report come through ZeroFox. We ingested it into the SOAR platform. Our team ran all these processes on it. There were certain things that we added to the block list. We were proactive in terms of updating the firewalls and maybe the web gateways. And here was the end result. We didn't find anything, but we proactively set our security standards up, and we've increased our posture. Having it done through a SOAR product means that your actionable time may go from hours or longer to minutes, depending on what you want to have for your automated process and the checks and balances that are in place. And that's probably one of the biggest things that we want to get across is that as an end-to-end type of solution and partnership, it's a really great way to get great intelligence, but then action on the intelligence in a really timely fashion, right? And really strengthen the security posture of the enterprise. And that's really the crux of what I wanted to get across in my area here. I mean, it's all about really strengthening the posture for different people and the enterprise as a whole, really, and showing the actionable side of the intelligence. I think, Amardeep, we're going to move into sort of the Q&A side of it. at this point?
Yes, thank you, Stan, and thanks, AJ. That was really very comprehensive. I have a couple of questions that have come in, and the first question is that, and I think, Stan, this is a question for you to answer. Does D3 come with playbooks? Do we need to code in the playbooks every time a new threat comes in? How does it work?
Yeah, good question. So out of the box, it'll come with a multitude of different playbooks. The idea of the playbook is that you don't have to code if you don't want to. You can, but we're really a low code, almost no code type SOAR platform. So a lot of any of the functions that I showed you within that playbook, those are out of the box functions. There wasn't any coding in there. They're basically drag and drop API capabilities within the tool set. Yeah.
Thanks, Stan. AJ, the next one is probably for you. It's related to the Russia-Ukraine report that you briefly showed. What exactly is that report, and how can we get access to it?
Oh, it's a good question. So when Russia invaded Ukraine, we took that as a rapid response item and have been writing reports and publishing reports since. So actually on our website, we're actually publishing a lot of this for free to the community. At first, we were publishing everything. Over time, of course, we're only putting out a segment of what we're doing to the community, and the rest is going into our platform to the customers. But if you go to the ZeroFox blog, I will have to probably provide a link to be specific on it. But if you go to the ZeroFox blog, we do have under research papers, I believe is the sub tab. There's a section for all of the Russia-Ukraine products that we have made public right now. And there are, I would say right now I have somewhere between 6 and 10 finished intelligence products specific to Russia, Ukraine, talking about threats to finance, threats to infrastructure, overall. Dave's just provided the link actually. Overall conflict updates. We're continuing to do a running update of that right now. I believe we'll be tapering that off here relatively soon. It's become sort of a steady state at this point. But if for those who want to get caught up on what's been going on in Russia, Ukraine, and what we've been doing in that area, certainly I would say reach out to our blog and feel free to pull down any and all of the intelligence. If you have further questions, feel free to reach out and we can certainly talk about that too.
Excellent. I see David has put that question, that link in the chat as well. So people will be able to access that link and go get that report. The next question is, can D3 help the collaboration process between MSSPs and the client-side security team? I think that's a really good question.
Yeah, so we've seen a fairly big uptick in SOAR on the MSSP side of it. I mean, face it, they're facing the same issues as enterprises, except at scale, because they're trying to help more than one particular client out. And absolutely, like the ability for the SOAR platform, I think one of the most important things is obviously the multi-tenancy side of it, but you need to be able to collaborate with the client. I think at this stage in the game, unless you're a really maybe a small business, you kind of want to know what's happening in terms of the security, even from the perspective of an MSSP that you've hired. So the ability to collaborate in the tool is really important. And yeah, it's because the platform is multi-tenant, you can let people in, you can let clients in, you can really restrict what they can see. Obviously, you can just restrict them to their particular tenant, but it's a great way for MSSPs and MDRs to actually intercommunicate with the client and to give them visibility into what they're actually doing. So it's sometimes, if they just supply a report going, here's what happened, it's not quite the same as the visibility of going into the actual platform to go, these are all the things that actually went on, here's the pieces, and being able to actually allow the client to help with the decisions, if that's something that they pay for.
Thank you, Stan. The next question, it's a really great question. And I'm just going to read it out. It was dropped in the chat, so I might have missed it earlier. I recently polled a few security experts and companies on SOAR adoption. Been a bit surprised how low the adoption rates are. Many are using a homegrown solution or manual processes. Do you see more companies implementing a SOAR, or at least planning to? Any guesses on the percentage of large or small SMB companies who have deployed SOAR?
Great question. So in short, I'm going to say yes, the adoption rate is going up. I think what you're seeing, and I'll talk maybe from the perspective of the SOAR industry is really only about 7 years old, honestly. I've been with D3 now for over 6 years. I've seen SOAR from its infancy into what it is now. And I think part of the adoption issue is that early on, it was very highly technical to adopt it. Like you really had to have a lot of coders. It was really only larger enterprises that could really afford to bring that on and really had the resources to deploy it. Within the last, I would say, 6 months to a year, you're seeing large improvements in the platforms themselves. Like, as I mentioned before, that this may go back to the question number that was posed earlier about, do you have to code, or on that side of it, and we're really trying to get away from that coding side of it, which is why the drag and drop, having a GUI to be able to pull those things out without requiring the coding skills. So Matt, to answer your question, yeah, we're seeing a rise in adoption even at the SMB level, but also especially at the MSSP and MDR level. Again, that's due to scaling. It's a bit of a different thing. They're usually not too resource strapped. Some of them are, but that's really more from a scalability process. And I think the last, any guesses on percentages for large SMBs? Well, you know what? I don't think I'm going to guess on percentages on that side of it.
Not enough. How's that?
There's probably not enough. That's a great answer there, AJ. It isn't enough at this point.
Yeah, obviously I'm not on the SOAR side of the business, so as an outsider to SOAR, but as somebody in the community, yeah, I think you hit it on the head as to why adoption was slow early on. Listen, I'm not a computer scientist. I'm not a network engineer, software engineer. I don't have a computer science degree. I don't do ones and zeros generally. As an Intel guy, I want people to be able to make actions, take action on the Intel. We just had this discussion, right? But I personally have worked in places where the early editions of SOAR, I understood the output and the value, but wasn't probably able to bring that into the environment and work with it. Because again, I'm working with a lot of Intel professionals. So now you got to work with somebody else. You got somebody do coding. It was not as easy. The technology has improved. D3, certainly one of the leaders in the space. Your technology makes it much easier. And I think we're going to see more adoption. Automation is what everybody says they want, right? Nobody has enough people. Nobody has enough time. It's impossible to work at the speed of cyber. So if you work in an industry where automation works, it's a growth industry, right? So I think the adoption is a really low number right now, which, the sales and marketing folks will say a large addressable market. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
But I think it's true. The reality is people need better automation, more of it. They need to be able to take action. The Intel products, just the one we show today. Listen, if you've got a solid Intel program, you could be ingesting tens or hundreds of those a day.
Yep.
How are you going to get through all that? People don't have time to read all those things and get through all of them and figure out what to do with them. If you have trusted vendors, you run a playbook like this, and sure, you'll get to read the context at some point, but by the time you read the context, the work's already been done, which is good. Now you're just telling leadership, yeah, this is a bad thing going on. Don't worry though, D3 took care of it. We're already, we've made the changes, we've updated, we're safe, but here's the context and, of what we should be looking for going forward. So I think there's a large market of this, and yeah, the reality is not enough people probably have SOAR in their environment right now. And that's just from the Intel standpoint. There's all the other components of the SOC and all the other good reasons to have a SOAR, obviously. But from my standpoint, I hope more people pick it up.
I can speak to a percentage from a marketer's standpoint that's that's really fascinated me ever since I've been a part of D3, and that is that and I know I'm straying off topic, but in 2021, 40% of D3's new customers were replacing an existing SOAR platform, and they chose to go with D3. So these were obviously people who understood the market really well, understood what they needed from a SOAR, and they kind of went through a whole comprehensive POC process with D3, something that we encourage all our customers to do, to just sort of get an idea of how D3 would stack up and compare against the other SOAR solutions that they were using before. But this is probably not the right forum for it. I'm going to move into the last question that we have before we call it a day. And this question is really for both AJ and Stan. How can we use ZeroFox with D3 if we are a D3 user?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Obviously, I think we ran through some of this demonstration now, right? So you're reading intelligence. What do I do about it, right? So we talked about what that process is, but it's the technology, I think, is the question, right? So we have integrations D3 has integrations. If you're a customer of either, well, you have to be a customer of both, I guess, to make it work really well, right? So yeah, if you're not a customer of one or the other of us, I recommend having that discussion. If you're one of our customers and you're looking at SOAR, D3 is the place to go. If you're a D3 customer and you're saying, well, how do I bring in more intel to be more successful? Come talk to me. And then we just do the integration. So it's a slick integration, works really well. So Stan can talk a little bit more about the technology there specifically. But ultimately, in order to be able to use both of these, you just gotta be a customer of us. The integration doesn't cost anything. We're not charging extra for it. We'll set you up. So, I mean, Stan, do you have more you want to talk about the integration specifically on your end?
Yeah, on the integration side of it, that's done and set up. I mean, we've had a really strong partnership with the ZeroFox team on the technical side for, it's got to be at least 6. Actually, it's probably coming up close to a year now. And that, as JJ said, that integration's there. Like if you're a customer of both, I think it's literally an API key that ZeroFox will provide you, goes in the platform, and at that point it's usable. So there's no additional cost or anything else like that. It's just part of both platforms and part of the technology partnership that we have. Yeah.
Okay. On that note, I know we've run a little bit over our time, but I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone who attended. Thank our speakers for taking out the time and talking to all of us today. I think this was definitely a very informative session. And like I said before, it will be recorded. The recording will be shared with everyone who had registered. So if you'd like to see it again, or if you have questions, you want to reach out to us, the email ID on the screen, marketing@d3security.com. And we can answer questions that are D3 related. If you have something that you want to talk to ZeroFox about, you can still reach out to us. We'll make sure to get your questions over to them. And thank you very much for joining. Really appreciate you taking out the time of your day and attending this session. And we hope to see you in the next upcoming webinar that we host.